Well, General Anthony Zinni joins us on the Young Turks now. General Zinni, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We really appreciate you coming on. Now, I got to tell the folks at home a couple of things that they should know before we start the interview. In the interest of fairness, General Zinni, of course, was the Commander-in-Chief of CENTCOM, but he's also currently Chairman of the Board and Acting President and CEO of BAE Systems Incorporated, the third largest global defense company. And my bias in this case is that I love the comments that General Zinni made earlier in public, so you see where I'm coming from. Okay, so now you know all that. General Zinni, let's start with, when did you leave CENTCOM?
I left in 2000.
And so you never wound up getting a chance to work with Rumsfeld or Cheney?
Thank God.
Now, I know you were out by then, but did it seem obvious to you that Iraq war was, let's say, misguided?
Absolutely. I thought we lost focus on who attacked us on 9/11. We were into Iraq with a guy in Saddam Hussein who threatened nobody and didn't have the capability to threaten anybody. And we were about to do it in a stupid way with too few troops and with people in there making decisions that didn't understand the region, the country, the circumstances. And it became a big drain on our military, and it was done in a way that obviously cost us casualties and a great deal of our treasure.
Now, here's the part I don't understand. Don Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney have been in government for a long, long time. How did they not see any of this?
I think that they made a decision ahead of time that they were going to do this, and they cherry-picked the intelligence and shut down people who would offer advice and warnings as to what could go wrong. And it was a decision made before the facts were really brought into play, or they heard all the different views and opinions. And I think they bought into this idea that it would be, to quote them in that time, a cakewalk and flowers in the streets.
Okay, so they think that Iraq's going to be easy, and they say, all right, look, we're going to cherry-pick the guys who are going to do it for us. We're going to cherry-pick the intelligence, etc. All right, I understand all that. But then why not plan for it? I mean, what's preventing? Were they lazy? I mean, there's a famous story of one of the generals, top generals, says, all right, here's how we're going to get into Iraq. Here's how we're going to take Baghdad. And then once we take it, and that slide, phase number 4 of the war was to be determined.
Yeah, the real tragedy in all this is there was a plan, and it had been developed over 10 years, and it recognized what had to be done in there. When I left CENTCOM, I left the plan that and my predecessors had worked on that called for 380,000 to 400,000 troops if you were going to go in, and that you didn't disband the Army, that you didn't go through a debathification process and alienate part of the population. You didn't close state-owned factories and put people out of work. That was all well known well before, and the plan was a solid one developed over a long period of time by a lot of smart people. Their problem was they rejected the plan, threw it away, and threw this ad hoc, too few troops, rosy scenario plan into play.
But I always come back to why, because I get the motivation behind going into Iraq. I don't get the motivation behind doing it poorly.
I think the reason it was done poorly, when the Rumsfeld Pentagon first came in, they wanted to cut ground troops. They wanted to reduce the Army to almost half its size because they had a sincere belief that the future was in precision weapon systems, space-based intelligence systems. Now suddenly they were faced with a situation where they needed more ground troops, and it sort of went against their plan. So they became determined to try to do this with few ground troops and thinking that just taking down the regime of Saddam Hussein solved the problem.
General Zinni, did you get any sense from the people that you talked to in the Pentagon while you were there, and obviously afterwards is more relevant, but you have a lot of contacts there, obviously, that their original plan was not just Iraq, that they were going to go further?
I think they had this misguided strategic belief that they would ignite a fire in Iraq, one of a democracy, free market economy, and somehow it would spread all over the Middle East. And they had this belief that the road to Jerusalem led through Baghdad, when it's just the opposite. And again, it's much like Vietnam. The basic tenets of the strategy that they put in play were flawed.
Now, General Clark tells of a moment where he went to the Pentagon and was talking to some of his old friends, and they said, Iraq is first, then Iran, and then they listed about 5 countries. Did you ever have any similar conversations?
No. I never heard that there was a plan beyond that. And if you think about it, we were, even though we didn't provide enough of the troops and attention to Afghanistan, we had already spread ourselves thin in Afghanistan and Iraq. And to think about a third mission would have been impossible for the military, especially the ground forces.
It certainly proved that to be the case. I'm not sure in their unbelievable arrogance that they thought that from the beginning. Now we're talking to General Anthony Zinni. He's the author of Leading the Charge, Leadership Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. We'll, of course, put that up on theyoungturks.com in our library so you can get it from there. Now I want to talk about the role of generals when a Secretary of Defense comes and says, hey, I've got a great plan. We're going to invade Iraq with very few troops. What is a top general supposed to do in that scenario?
Well, you're supposed to, if you feel something's wrong or flawed or there are parts of it that in your military judgment don't make sense, you have an obligation within the system to speak up. If you feel they're so flawed that endangers the mission, our troops, our national security, then you have to step out. You have to resign or retire and speak from the ranks of the retired as a private citizen.
Are you disappointed that some of your fellow generals who were still in the Pentagon did not do that?
Yes, I am, because, I think they were pushed aside. Military advice, especially that went counter to what they wanted to believe, was not invited in, and I think there should have been more insistence on military advice being provided. We went through this in Vietnam. There was a great book written, The Dereliction of Duty, that, and it was actually written by an Army major criticizing the generals. And during the course of Iraq, we had young officers write letters and articles criticizing their generals for not speaking up.
And you think they did it again?
Yes, yes.
All right. Now, I want to ask you, because we don't, of course you know because you were the head of CENTCOM, but we don't know how these things work. If a president comes to you and says, look, we're already in Iraq or we're already in Afghanistan, I'm not asking you to take the country. I know you guys can do that, and you have, tried and true methods of executing that mission. Instead, now we're mired in an insurgency. Now, go ahead, General Zinni, get us out of it. Where do you start? What do you do?
Well, I think the first thing you have to be sure people understand that in order to get out of it, it's going to take time. Counterinsurgency operations require a number of things. One is changing the environment. It could be a political system, could be the economic system, the social system, building up the security forces, the local ones, so they could replace our troops and other international troops as quickly as possible, and then providing the stability for them in the way of support after that, after you build them up. I think General Dave Petraeus is a good example of somebody that gets it. And he came into Iraq when it was really failed, and his predecessors had not really understood it. But it took him a couple of years to really turn it around. And, of course, we're leaving at a time now where we have at least given a chance to the Iraqi government to succeed. But if you look at Afghanistan now, I think we have to understand this is a 3 to 5 year process at best before we can do those things.
What was the key element in Iraq that we might be able to repeat in Afghanistan? Because I know a lot of people talked about the surge and the number of troops brought in, and now we're bringing in more troops to Afghanistan. But it seemed to me that the real deal was in striking deals with the people on the ground. I could be wrong about that, so I wanted to ask you what you thought was the critical part.
No, I think you're right. We approached, I think when we first took an honest look at who the, quote, enemy was, we realized they weren't all the same. And there were reconcilable elements within the forces that were opposed to us. And so we began to approach those, particularly in Anbar province with the Sunnis and the Sunni awakening. And I think that can be repeated in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Even by the admission of the Pakistanis and the Afghans, there are what they call reconcilable Taliban. They're obviously hardcore and Al-Qaeda, that won't apply, but there are many others that aren't ideologically motivated. And they may be enemies just because they don't want you in their village or they don't understand who you are. You're the foreign troops. And communications, contact, engagement, incentives, all can work. So I think you're right. That's a major lesson that can be applied in Afghanistan.
Since Barack Obama's come in, we've gotten a number of the top terrorist leaders. We, along with other governments, for example, Baitullah Masood just killed in Pakistan. And then the top al-Qaeda leader in Southeast Asia was killed in Indonesia. Now, that was the Indonesian government, not us. But it seems like there's a number of successes. Do you have a sense of what Obama or Secretary of Defense Gates is doing right now?
I think several things. One, he redefined the strategy, President Obama. It's an ambitious one, but he's trying to first internationalize the effort. In other words, this is not just the United States problem. This is the world's problem. And the burden sharing should be spread evenly. There should be NATO troops in there in greater numbers that actually will take up the fight, including ours. The second thing he's recognized, and there's a lot of work to be done here, we got to get regional cooperation and coordination to get this done. It has to be India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan working together, and only we can make that happen because they're not natural bedfellows. He's also now committed to developing the Afghan security forces and supporting the Pakistan security forces and building them up. That's going to take a while. It's going to take a few years. But, eventually they need to replace our troops on the ground. And then again, going back to your point about engaging the Taliban and at least reducing the number of enemy you have by some sort of engagement and incentives, that is the fourth part, I think, that has to come into play. So I think those are the principal components of the strategy that he's articulated.
We're talking to General Anthony Zinni. He was the Commander-in-Chief of CENTCOM and a special envoy to the Middle East. His book is now Leading the Charge, Leadership Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. One more thing on Bush and Cheney. Today, Dick Cheney came out and apparently said, as a prelude to his new book that he's going to write, that Bush was too soft in his second term. Do you think that the problem might have been reverse, that Bush listened to Dick Cheney too much in his first term?
I think definitely in the beginning that the president seemed to want to receive all his information and to base a decision on from the Rumsfeld-Cheney line, and people like Secretary Colin Powell and others that might have provided some balance to that were not really heard and not really invited into the closest circle to provide that advice.
And finally, I wanted to address one issue that's very important, and that's the military-industrial complex. Now,
right.
You're the CEO and the chairman of the board of the third largest global defense company.
Actually, second now.
Oh, second. Nicely done. So, but in all seriousness,
sure.
Do we have a conflict of interest problem that if the top generals know that they are likely to go into the top defense industry corporations afterwards and how they carry out their jobs while they're at the Pentagon?
I think that we have to be very careful with that. I think, President Eisenhower certainly gave us the caution. It's not every general that moves over there. And we have restrictions on the amount of time that you have to be gone or can't reconnect to former commands and that sort of thing. Where I see in the good companies, certainly, general officers or others that are brought in are there because of their expertise. I mean, after all, you're providing equipment and support for our soldiers and Marines, airmen, and sailors, and you want people in there that know the best kind of equipment to bring in. If those generals and admirals are used in any way to influence sales or political decisions on programs, that's absolutely wrong. As a matter of fact, I think you would be taken to task in a business if that even happened. If you're just going to use their expertise in what is needed out there and how best to meet the requirements that are put out, then I think it's appropriate, because who knows better. But I take your point. I mean, we have to watch that. It can get too cozy if you're not careful. And we have Congress, the military and the Pentagon that makes the strategy, and then the industry that supplies that. We should not try to influence from the industry side the strategic decisions or the political decisions. We just saw two major programs canceled, the F-22 and the Army's Future Combat System. And Congress agreed with Secretary Gates and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs on those decisions, and industry stayed out of the way, which I think is the appropriate thing to do.
Do you think those were right decisions to cancel those programs?
I think they were hard decisions. There's always a risk in what you do. There was no clear-cut, easy decision, and I think it was the best decision under the circumstances. And I think there are going to be more decisions like that, and we shouldn't think that they're that easy to make, because when you make a decision like that, you accept some risk. You accept less of an advantage in certain areas, but that's where the trade-offs have to come. I mean, budgets are going to come down. We can't afford everything. We have other things that are putting demands on our dollar.
General Zinni, there's two parts of that. One, as far as the possible conflict of interest.
Right.
One is after you get out of the military, then you could go back and influence your friends that are still in the military, and you address that in your answer. The second part of it is, while you're still in the military, full well knowing that there could be some lucrative contracts in the future, isn't it normal that a person would think, well, you know, I better be good to this defense industry because that's where my bread could be buttered later?
Well, first of all, anyone that while they're on active duty has any communication or in any way, you know, at least implies that they would accept or has any indication of employment anywhere, that is against it's against the law. You can't do that, and they can't talk to you while you're still on active duty. So I don't know of anyone that could be certain of that. Second of all, if you understand the way the contracting works, and this is where we've got to, you know, always maintain the regulation as the way it goes, the contracts put out the requirements, and the companies bid and present proposals on those requirements. As a matter of fact, if I were to go into a general's office, let's say a commander of CENTCOM, and try to influence the decision in any way, he would be subject to legal action for even entertaining me for that. And I would be subject to some scrutiny and eventually some reprimand of some sort for even engaging in that. That's totally inappropriate. It shouldn't be done that way. It has to stay with the program managers, the acquisition process, and not have that kind of influence that goes above or tries to short-circuit that. Believe me, when I was a general on active duty, if a retired general came to see me that I knew that worked for a defense industry company, my lawyer, my staff judge advocate, was sitting next to me, and he was there to make sure nothing was said or done in that meeting that was inappropriate.
Well, that makes sense, and I'm sure that most people would not do things up front like that, but I think it's got to be in the back of someone's head, and I'm a little worried about that. As a general problem, I have to be honest with you. I don't know what the fix is, but
well, you know, I think it's close scrutiny. We ought to have the kinds of agencies in government that inspect and are involved in this. Certainly, the military legal side to ensure none of this happens. Contract monitoring needs to be done a lot better. I mean, I think we've seen the way contracts have been handled in the rush to the conflicts we're in now that certainly need improvement.
General Zinni, let me ask you one final question, then, on an unrelated note. You know, conservatives these days, or Republicans, often say, hey, we shouldn't do a public option in health care reform because the government can't run anything right. As a man who ran CENTCOM, which is a fairly large government operation, do you take any offense at that?
Yeah, I do in the sense as to say no government agency is competent or efficient. There are many that are. By the same token, there are many that aren't. You know, my problem with this whole healthcare debate is it's become over-politicized. We need a civil dialogue. It's a serious matter, and we've made this a political issue full of spin and rhetoric that isn't going to help the process. And I wish we would get back to some sort of intellectual civil dialogue on this thing because it's too important.
All right, General Tony Zinni, former Commander-in-Chief of CENTCOM, current CEO of BAE Systems, and the author of Leading the Charge, Leadership Lessons from the Battlefield to the Boardroom, which is up now on the YoungTurks.com library. General Zinni, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.